Hmm. Hey, friends. So today we're going to talk about something that's on my mind quite a bit, which is the Aquarian Age revelation and the ascending church of wokeness. So this is not going to be an anti-wokeness video or a pro-wokeness video. This is going to be a video instead that tries to understand and explore uh, kind of what's going on in the collective with the consciousness shift that we're observing astrologically moving into the age of Aquarius, and how that gives us a lens to look at the current culture war and rising ideology that's coming into institutional power in this time. So let's get into it. Um, so I think it's helpful if we view this through the lens astrologically of thinking about a new revelation that comes to humanity in every age as we move through the zodiac wheel every 2000 years or so. We move into a new age. We're coming out of the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. When that precisely began is debated. It's certainly been building for our lifetimes. And my feeling, and many others as well, I think, is this last few years was really the final cusp portal to moving fully into the age of Aquarius. So if we look at the Piscean age and we ask, what was the revelation? What was the revelation to humanity during that time that was encapsulated in the dominant religions of the past 2000 years? And if we look at the common thread that all of the dominant religious ideologies from the Piscean age have in common, I think it's a submission to a higher authority and a reverence for the transcendent, for a power that is bigger than the self, bigger than the ego. Remember, we were coming out of the age of Aries at the time of the Piscean age emerging. And this was the time of figures like Jesus, Krishna, Buddha, all coming in the emergence around the time of the emergence of the Piscean age. We were coming out of the age of Aries, which was an age of where the gods of war were really exalted, and humanity, the collective during the age of Aries, according to the historical data we have and the mythology of that time, was it was very Aries-like, very Mars-like, right? So this shift came into the collective at that time that seemed to be telling humanity, giving this Piscean revelation, like, wait a minute, we're too much in our egos, in the self, and there's something about moving into this new age where there's a revelation about submission to the transcendent, reverence for a higher power, if you will. And so we can see that as the Piscean revelation. And then we can look at how the churches and the institutions of the Piscean age corrupted and perverted that revelation. But before we do that, let's just kind of speculate on the age of Aquarius and the new revelation that's coming in now in this time. I think we see remnants of this revelation in what is commonly referred to as wokeness, or wokeism is very much a religious embodiment of it. There are others as well. And I think a lot of different people are weaving this tapestry right now of like what this revelation actually is. If I were to give my best effort at articulating it, it's something like that we're capable of breaking free of mental constructs that have held us back in the Piscean age. Aquarius is, it's an air sign. It's the air sign that represents the highest level of mental maturity. And so in this age of Aquarius, we're getting this revelation that, wait a minute, we've been in these mental constructs that are very oppressive, and we actually don't need these mental constructs anymore. We have the ability and the power to create our own reality to some respect, in ways that the Piscean age consciousness has been oppressing us. Also, with the Aquarian age, there's the revelation that we are all one. Humanity is all interconnected to this interdependent web, and all of the barriers, the tribal barriers, the isms and the schisms based on the Piscean Age isms and schisms, at least. There are still going to be isms and schisms in this new age. There already are. They're just based on a different, it's a different factor that's dividing people, I think, in this age. But the Aquarian revelation is showing us that, hey, all of these divisions based on racial identity, gender identity, religious identity, they're starting to fall away. And we're realizing that we all share this common humanity. And so that's very much the Aquarian Age revelation, right? So just pause here and look at my notes. So what I think we see now is a really, really strong religious fervor that in the West, the Trump movement and just the nationalist, like religious nationalist backlash movement in general, which you could kind of see as like the last gasps of the Piscean Age institutions kind of fighting back to the shift that's happening. We see a really strong religious fervor now. And of course, a lot of people that are captivated and animated by this don't see it as religious fervor. It's anti-religion because it's based on science, it's based on facts, not based on superstition, and all the ways that they would contrast it and say that it's not a religion. It's typically the the critics on the other side that are against, that are not even giving any credence to the revelation itself, that are just sort of taking the anti-woke position. But let's kind of get a little bit more into that. The key question really is like, okay, if this is the revelation of the Aquarian Age, then it seems obvious that in the culture war, there's one side that's really getting the revelation and one side that's not, right? And there's some truth in that. The conservative polarity is definitely filled with people who, it's not entirely these people, but there are certainly people in that camp who just don't get the revelation yet, right? So they're like analogous to the heathens of old in early biblical times that are just, and that's the way they're seen basically by the dominant culture now. If you're not getting this Aquarian revelation, you're morally outcast. Basically, there's a there's just a moral, you're morally outcast essentially. And we can see that this is really the dominant ideology that's come to power now in our institutions. And you can look at that by noticing what we're allowed to criticize, or what type of speech produces the most outrage, right? So in the Piscean Age, in the religious age, like the most blasphemous thing to do was to speak out against God, to speak out against religion, whatever the religion happened to be in your culture. To speak out against God, to blaspheme was like the worst. You're morally outcast. You know, it's not allowed. Well, now, with regards to the Piscean Age religions, that's completely allowed. You know, you're going to anger some religious people, but in terms of the dominant culture, on social media, whatever, it's completely and perfectly fine to criticize and offend that ideology. But it's the new Aquarian Age sort of woke ideology that is absolutely not allowed to be criticized. And if it is criticized, anyone important, they're going to be canceled, they're going to be piled on, and all of that. So we see that parallel because there's this strong religious fervor happening. Like these people are very animated by this sense of like, we're right, we're the ones that have the revelation, and these people don't, so therefore they're heathens. They need to be converted or they need to be outcast. So some people might wonder, well, okay, if there's this revelation that's happening, and that this revelation is true, what the Aquarian Age revelation is bringing to humanity, that we need to break down these old isms and schisms, we need to see that we're all one, and we need to break out of our old mental constructs. Don't we want to be on the side of the institutions that are waving those flags, right? Like we certainly don't want to be on the side of the institutions that are anti those things, right? Like that's the pretty intuitive position to take. And that's the position I think that the left generally takes. Like they have the intuitive feeling that is correct that like, hey, we've got this revelation. We're getting this thing that's coming through the collective, this meta truth. And there's people on over here on this side that clearly don't get this meta truth yet. So it's just clear our side is right, their side is wrong. It's like as simple as that. And from that perspective, one would wonder, well, why would you then criticize that side? You should just be on that side. You should be on the side of the ones that are waving the flag that have this revelation, the Aquarian revelation. They're correct. So to understand why we might be critical of these institutions and this ideology, all we have to do is look back to the Piscean Age religion and see how the Piscean Age revelation was perverted and corrupted by institutional power. It's pretty simple. Whether we can speculate about the force behind that, is it some metaphysical force like a demonic entity or entities that are just always, wanting to deceive humanity, and that force is there. So every time there's an enlightened revelation, there's just metaphysically, it's going to be met by an energy of darkness that wants to deceive and pervert that revelation. That's a possibility. Another possibility is that there's just an inherent nature to power, and power, institutional power, and the people that are gravitated toward institutional power, and the human nature that's involved, greed, fear, desire for control, power, etc. It just inherently corrupts the revelation, right? So it's this. So from that perspective, one would be wise to be skeptical when a new institutional power comes into play and says, hey, we're waving the flag with this new revelation, because it essentially, to me, looks like it's a new church. It's a new church that's rising to power. And it looks to me like the culture war is divided between the loudest voices, at least, are people that are denying the revelation because they're only focusing on either A, how it threatens the Piscean Age ideology that they're still holding, or because they're just so sensitive to the potential institutional corruption or metaphysical perversion, either or, of this new revelation. So they're just super focused on, they're taking this anti-wokeness hardline perspective because all they can see is the negative side of it. And they're seeing how institutional power can and already is perhaps corrupting the Aquarian revelation. And these anti-woke people who just refuse to admit to the revelation, or refuse to open up to it, or refuse to get curious about it, like, hey, maybe there's an essence that these people are right about on the left. Like maybe we should be humble and open up to, like, maybe there's something really here. Well, they're very analogous to me to like the hardline atheists of the late Piscean Age, the people that only look at the negative side of religion and don't see that there's any positive revelation there. And that's like a lot of like leftist thought for the past several decades or even centuries has been dominated by that, this like resentment toward the Piscean Age religion, to so much to the point where they don't even acknowledge that there's a revelation there. It's just like, this is just a corrupt institution, and it's all about power and it's all about control, and we should be skeptical of everything that these religions tell us. There's no gold in here. It's all just shit, basically. That's like the skeptical, atheist, late stage Piscean Age perspective. And that's understandable by the late Piscean Age, the age that we all grew up in, because the corruption and the perversion of the Piscean Age revelation was just so apparent. All of the corruption all around us with institutional religion. And it was just clear to us that, like, wow, there's something off with this institutional religion, which is what's given way to, in the last couple generations, just this mass breakaway from the old Piscean Age ideologies and religions toward this new secular, humanist, and or transhumanist, futurist, Aquarian Age ideology that's kicking in. And though people that are still holding on to the fundamentalist Piscean Age ideologies are in the minority now. And a lot of people don't understand that on the left. They think like, oh, the majority of the country and the Western world is still Christian. Or if you take the whole world at large and you include all of the dominant religions, yeah, the majority of people still do identify with these religions, but these religions have lost their institutional power. They don't have the power in the culture that they once had. And it's the new ideology that has the power, particularly in the institutions that guide how we think as a people. Like we can see how the conservative, old school religious faction, I guess, still has political power, like actionable political power. When it comes to how we think, though, which for me is like a really central aspect, I guess, just looking at it through more of a theological lens, the institutions that influence how we think now, which is the media, big tech, Hollywood, education, are completely dominated now by the new Aquarian Age revelation and the various religions or quasi religions, I guess you could say, that are sprouting up. And the Trump era seemed to provide like a archetypal villain. And that's not to say that he didn't actually have these characteristics, or that all of this was made up. It's just that he was a larger than life character that seemed to amplify and like speed up the religious fervor, because he provided this like binary, because with the new Aquarian Age revelation and the religions that are forming around it, the new devil, it's not occupied so much by like the metaphysical trickster like Satan or demonic entities that exist in a transcendent space. The devil is basically the oppressor class. And Trump was the embodiment of that. He was a cartoonish embodiment of that, in many ways, like that just in reality already. And then he was cartoonishly exaggerated by, all of the forces that are consciously or unconsciously using that cartoon as a, that larger than life cartoon as a, it's a, to help build the mythology of this new Aquarian Age religion, you could say, that's forming. So going back to the point of Piscean Age corruption, the revelation being corrupted by religions, that's the reason why one would be concerned about the new ideology of so-called wokeism. There's a third position to take. In other words, there's the first position is, this revelation is bullshit. There's nothing here. You guys are all just religious maniacs. And the second position to take is, this revelation is absolutely true. Anyone who doesn't believe it and is not on the side that's waving this flag is basically a heathen, dumb, ignorant, or just morally worthy of outcast and shame. The third position would be, there's a true revelation contained here, and there's reason to be skeptical about how it's going to be manipulated by whatever forces manipulate revelations. And we may look at that in some future videos. There's a lot of things that we could talk about with the Piscean Age corruption and the impacts of religion. And all you have to do, to get all those criticisms, just look at the ideology of leftism. It will give you all of those criticisms, and it points them all out accurately, historically, like Here's all the things that went wrong with religion. Of course, they tend to overlook the gold in it, like what the revelation was. But just looking at it psychologically, aside from institutional power and how it corrupted things, we can see how the Piscean Age revelation can be oppressive just psychologically if if it's inverted, right? So this idea that I must submit myself to a higher power and surrender my ego and submit to the transcendent, not my will, but thy will. That revelation can become oppressive if I start to turn that inward on myself with like, I'm inherently bad, I'm shameful, I'm not worthy, woe is me. I'm extremely anxious and fearful about doing anything because I'm afraid that I might upset God. Um, you know, so it can be a very oppressive ideology if it's perverted or inverted. And that's why atheists, leftists, they tend to see that part of it and just be like, well, don't you see that this is just a corrupted or not even corrupted? They just see that it's a manipulative force that is keeping people from being free psychologically. Like Karl Marx observed that. He observed the psychological oppressive nature of the Piscean Age revelation when it's inverted, and we're just like living in a state of shame, fear, right? So, in the same way, we can speculate about how the Aquarian Age revelation could be inverted, aside from the power structures and governments and big tech and whatever, and how they may want to utilize the revelation for their power and manipulate the binary and the heathens and the in-group, that group, which of course they do and they will. But aside from that, we can speculate on how just the Aquarian Age revelation itself can become oppressive if it gets inverted. And I'm not going to go into the details of all that because that's probably another video. But the anti-woke critics, the loudest out there right now, what they're doing is they're astutely pointing out those areas. They're pointing out those areas, and people that are seeing that get it, and that's why that content is really resonating with them. I mean, JP Sears is a big one that comes to mind, just illuminating how this revelation can be inverted and create a state of consciousness that's very disempowering, where critical thinking is shut down, the heart is shut down, our courage gets shut down. So we can get all into that more in detail in another video, but like the point is that I'm trying to make here in this one is just taking the broader view astrologically, looking at the Piscean Age. We see a revelation, we see an inversion or perversion, corruption. That's what would give us reason for concern. And so if we take the sort of the late Piscean Age mystic perspective, which is what I grew up in and was trained in, so that's the perspective that I speak from, which is the perspective that, hey, we accept the revelation and we see how there were some psychological inversions and perversions here as we're awakening and coming into this age of Aquarius. So we need to actually integrate that Piscean Age revelation into the new Aquarian revelation. And we need to integrate that in a way that's wise so that we don't make the same mistakes of the last age, and so that we don't forget like that revelation. That would be like a very general critique of the wokeism movement, is that it's rather than, this is generally speaking, but rather than integrating the Piscean Age revelation and then integrating and weaving that with the new Aquarian Age revelation, it's like pushing, it's not even acknowledging the Piscean Age revelation. So they're cutting the cord. There's a disconnect. There's like, no, all of that shit is just old oppressor shit. We don't want any of that stuff anymore. We're creating something new. So then the fundamentalists who get the Piscean age revelation and they're holding that in their hearts, they're getting that. Well, they're just seeing the dominant society now just completely like detach from that revelation and not get it. And so that's why in their language, it's like where people are leaving God. You know, we're disconnecting from that revelation. Whereas if we were integrating the gold from it and then weaving a new story with the Aquarian revelation that's coming through, we're all one, we're creating our reality, we're all interconnected, and we're still connected to this transcendent higher power. And it's still important that we submit to that in this process of Aquarian unfoldment and evolution. So I'd love to know what you think, especially if you're an astrologer. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And there will probably be a lot more videos on this in the future, other various aspects. Thanks for tuning in. If you resonate with the content, hit like and subscribe. Really appreciate it. And peace out.